There's this little detail in One Piece that I've always loved, and it's easy to miss the first time round. Every so often a character will square up for a fight, and a thin ribbon of what looks like smoke or steam starts curling off their shoulders. No announcement, no big speech, just this quiet little sash of haze drifting there like it's got somewhere to be. And if you know what it means, it's one of the more exciting things you can spot on the page. It means their devil fruit has woken up. So that's tonight really. We're going to wander through every devil fruit awakening the story has shown us so far, roughly in the order they turned up. Taking our time, no rush, nothing to solve, quick heads up, we drift into the newer arcs near the end, so there are spoilers in here. Nothing you have to do with any of this, nowhere to be. Just settle in and get comfortable, and we'll start before anyone even had a word for it. Before we get anywhere near the flashy stuff, it helps to know what we're actually looking at. And oddly enough, the cleanest explanation in the whole series comes from Kaido, who is not exactly the reflective, sit you down and explain things type. There's a moment in the 1-0 arc where he's fighting Luffy, and Luffy does something new, something Kaido clearly wasn't expecting. And instead of just swinging at him again, Kaido sort of pauses and tells us what he's seeing. He says awakening happens when a devil fruit user's body and mind finally catch up to the power of the fruit itself. That's the whole idea really. The fruit always had this higher ceiling to it, this fuller version of what it could do, and awakening is the user growing into it at last. It's not a new toy bolted on from outside. It's more like the fruit was always this strong, and the person just wasn't ready to hold all of it yet. I really like that framing. It quietly reframes the whole thing. Awakening stops being a power-up you find lying around and becomes something closer to maturity. The fruit and the person meeting in the middle, after years of the person lagging behind. Sort of like how you can own a really good instrument for ages and still only be playing half of what it's capable of, until one day you're not. Now the reason we don't see this all the time is that it's rare. Genuinely rare. Loads of characters in this world have devil fruits, and only a small handful ever awaken them. And here's the part that always gets me a bit. Mastery on its own doesn't guarantee it. You can be brilliant with your fruit, world-class, terrifying, and still never awaken. It seems to take a specific kind of long, deep, slightly obsessive relationship with the power. The people who pull it off tend to be the ones who got their fruit young, and then spent decades living inside it, which makes sense when you think about how Kaido described it. Bodies and minds don't catch up overnight. The other thing to get straight up front is that awakening doesn't look the same for everyone, because it depends entirely on the type of fruit you've got. And there are 3 types, which most of you already know, but let's lay them out gently, because they matter for everything that follows. You've got paramecia, which is the big catch-all category, the strange ones, the powers that don't fit anywhere else. When a paramecia awakens, the general pattern is that the user can push their power outward, off their own body and onto the world around them. We'll get into what that actually looks like properly a little later, because the first person to show it off deserves the full treatment. But that's the gist. The power stops being just about you and starts being about your surroundings. Then you've got Zoan, the animal fruits, the ones that let you turn into a beast or a beast-human hybrid. Zoan awakening goes a different direction. Instead of reaching outward, it turns inward and cranks everything up. More strength, more speed, and this really noticeable jump in how fast the body heals. Zoan awakening is the one that makes people frighteningly hard to put down. There's a catch to it, a proper one, but I'll save that for the next section because the first example of it is a bit of a horror story, and I don't want to spoil the mood too early. And then there's Logia, the element fruits, smoke and fire and lightning and all that. And here's the honest truth about Logia awakening. We've basically never seen it. Not clearly, not confirmed, not with a name on it. It's the one gap in the whole picture. Fans have theories, obviously, and there are little moments here and there people point to. But if you're waiting for me to explain what a fully awakened Logia does, I can't, because Oda hasn't shown us yet. I find that genuinely fun rather than annoying, and we'll come back to it right at the end, because it feels like the right note to drift out on. So that's the mechanism. Now the tell, that ribbon of smoke I mentioned at the very start. This is the visual shorthand the story uses to say, quietly, this person is awakened. It sits around the shoulders, this floating sash of haze, sometimes described as looking a bit like a scarf that forgot about gravity. Once you know to look for it, you start clocking it everywhere. And it's a lovely bit of visual storytelling because it never gets announced. The characters don't point at it. Nobody goes, I see your shoulder smoke. It's just there, doing the work of telling the reader that the person in front of you has crossed a line that most devil fruit users never will. And honestly, that restraint is the thing I appreciate most about how awakening is handled. In a lot of stories, a power-up this big would come with a transformation sequence, a scream, a beam of light going up into the sky. Here it's a bit of smoke and a slightly different feeling in the air. The understatement makes it feel more dangerous, not less. Like the character is so far past needing to show off that the smoke is just a side effect they can't be bothered to hide. One more small thing, while we're still on the basics, because it comes up later and I'd rather plant it now. Not everyone who awakens keeps that smoke. And not everyone who shows the smoke has awakened in a clean, controlled way. There's a difference between waking your fruit up properly and having it wake up and drag you along with it. That distinction is going to matter quite a lot in a moment, because the very first time the series ever showed us awakening, it wasn't a triumph, it was a warning. Nobody in that scene even used the word. So let's go back down to the deepest, most miserable prison in the world and start there. Actually, since we've got a minute, there's one more piece of the puzzle that makes awakening make more sense, and it's a strange one. There's a growing suggestion in this world that devil fruits aren't just powers. They might be closer to living things. They seem to have wills of their own, preferences even, a sort of personality baked into them. This is clearest with the animal fruits, the zoans, which behave almost like there's a creature in there with its own opinions about how it wants to be used. But the hint is that it might be true of all of them to some degree. The fruit isn't a tool you pick up. It's more like a passenger you agree to carry. And when you look at awakening that way, it gets a bit more interesting and a bit more unsettling. If the fruit has a will, then awakening isn't just you catching up to the power. It's you and the power reaching some kind of agreement about who's driving. When that goes well, you get someone in total command of an ability most people can barely imagine. When it goes badly, well, that's the section we're about to get to. The other reason I mention it is because of how the top tier characters treat awakening when it comes up in conversation. They talk about it the way you talk about a rumour that turned out to be real. Something the veterans have heard whispers of, that most people assume is exaggeration, right up until they watch it happen in front of them and realise the whispers undersold it. It gets called a trump card more than once, the thing you keep in your back pocket for the fight you actually need to win, which tells you something about how rare and how decisive it is without anyone having to spell it out. One last thing about the mechanism, and it's the part I find genuinely mysterious even after all these years. There doesn't seem to be a technique for it. You can't sit down and practice awakening the way you'd practice a sword form or drill a specific move. Nobody in the story teaches a class on how to awaken your fruit. It just happens, eventually, to certain people, after enough time and enough depth with the power, and often at a moment of real crisis rather than in calm training. Doflamingo had it before we met him. Luffy surfaced when his heart had all but stopped. It arrives more like a thing that grows in you quietly and then reveals itself, than a switch you learn to flip. Which is why, for all the explaining we can do about what awakening is, the how of getting there stays a bit foggy, even in a world that has scientists carefully studying devil fruits. Some of it, apparently, you can't rush and you can't force. It comes when the person and the power have simply spent long enough together. That patience requirement is probably why so many of the people we're about to meet got their fruits young. Almost all of them have carried their power since childhood, and then spent their entire adult lives leaning on it, living inside it, until it became less a tool they used and more a part of how they think. You don't awaken a power you picked up last week. It seems to want years, the kind of deep familiarity where using the fruit is as natural as moving your own hand, which quietly makes awakening a story about time as much as it's a story about strength. The people who reach it are, almost without exception, the ones who've been at it the longest. There's no shortcut hiding anywhere in this, which I find rather lovely in a world that's otherwise full of shortcuts. Some things you can only earn by outlasting them, and you tend to notice it changes more than just the fighting. Luffy's hair goes white in his. The prison beasts lost their minds in theirs. There's a suggestion that awakening reaches into who a person is, not just what they can do, which makes sense if the fruit really does carry a will of its own. Cross that threshold, and you're not just stronger, you're a little more the thing your fruit always wanted you to be. Sometimes that's beautiful. Sometimes, as we're about to see, it's a tragedy. Right, that's the groundwork sorted more or less. Everything from here is just watching different people walk through that door and seeing what's on the other side for each of them. And as I said, the first ones through didn't walk. They were dragged. Picture the bottom of the sea, not the pretty parts with the coral. The other bit, the cold, black, pressure-crushing depths where the light gave up ages ago. That's roughly where Impel Down sits. It's the great underwater prison of this world, built in descending levels, and the further down you go, the worse it gets. Until you reach the floors reserved for the people the world would genuinely rather forget exist. And prowling those lower floors, keeping the prisoners in line, are these enormous, half-animal creatures called the jailer beasts. There are 5 of them we should talk about. Minotaurus, who's the bull, Rhinoceros, the rhino, which is a bit of a mouthful, but you can hear what they were going for. Minokoala, the koala, and Minozebra, the zebra. And I know, a koala sounds cuddly, but this one is about 10 feet of muscle with a truncheon, so maybe adjust the mental image. Here's the thing about them, and the reason we start here. When Luffy and his little band of prisoners are trying to fight their way through, these beasts are almost impossible to deal with. You hit them, they get back up. You hit them harder, they shrug it off and heal faster than they've got any right to. They're relentless in this dull, grinding, unstoppable way that makes them feel less like guards and more like a natural disaster with a uniform. And at the time, on a first read, you just assume that's what they are. Big, scary prison monsters. Move along. But there's a veteran in the group who knows exactly what he's looking at. And that's Crocodile, old school pirate, seen everything, not impressed by much. And he clocks it immediately. He tells the others that these beasts have awakened devil fruits. That's the first time the word ever comes up in the whole series. Not in a grand reveal, not attached to some noble hero coming into their power. It's Crocodile in a prison, casually explaining why the monsters chasing them won't stay down. And it's a nice little character beat buried in there too, because it tells you exactly what kind of veteran Crocodile is. He's not fazed by these things. He's seen enough of the world to recognise a phenomenon most people have never even heard of, and to name it without breaking stride. In a scene that's mostly about survival, that one line quietly reminds you there's a whole generation of old, experienced pirates who know things the younger crews are only just bumping into. Awakening, to a man like Crocodile, is old news. To Luffy and his lot, at that point, it's a word they've never heard. That gap between the veterans and the newcomers is a thing the series keeps coming back to, and it's sitting right there in a throwaway line at the bottom of a prison. And that framing matters because the jailer beasts are our first look at the cost of Zone Awakening, which I promised I'd get to. So here it is, and this is the version I want you to hang on to. because I won't be re-explaining it every time it comes up later. I'll just nod at it. When a Zoan awakens, you get all that lovely extra strength and speed and recovery I mentioned earlier. That's the upside, and it's a big one. The healing especially. An awakened Zoan can take damage that would end most fights and just carry on, knitting itself back together while it keeps coming at you. But the animal fruits, remember, seem to have a will of their own, a personality, and when the awakening isn't done carefully, that personality can win. It can flood the user, drown out the human part, and leave you as something that's mostly beast and barely person anymore. That's what happened to the jailer beasts. They didn't grow into their awakening the way Kaido described, slow and controlled, body and mind catching up together. Theirs was forced, pushed through before they were ready, and the price was their minds. They lost the human bit. What's left is this permanent, half-transformed state where the animal is driving, and there's not much of anyone home behind the eyes. They're not planning anything. They're not clever. They just are, endlessly, in the way that a machine is. And there's a lovely little visual detail that ties back to what we talked about, which is that the jailer beasts don't have the smoke. No floating sash around the shoulders. And that's deliberate. That ribbon of haze is the mark of a proper, complete awakening. The kind where the person is still in charge. The beast skips that. They got the power without the mastery, so they get the strength and the healing, but not the badge. It's a genuinely clever bit of world building, because it means once you learn the rule, you can look at any awakened character and read how in control they actually are, just from whether the smoke is there. I find these four oddly sad, if I'm honest. Everyone remembers them as the annoying wall you have to get past in Impel Down, and fair enough, that's what they are in the moment. But once you understand what awakening is and what it did to them, they read differently on a rewatch. These were people once, or at least they were users with minds and names and presumably lives before somebody decided to shove their fruits past the point of no return and turn them into tireless guard dogs for a prison. There's no coming back from it either. It's not a mood they're in, it's just what they are now. Fun detail, and this is the kind of thing that makes One Piece a real pleasure to sit with over the years. When these beasts first showed up, awakening as a full concept didn't really exist yet in the reader's mind. It was one line from Crocodile, and then the story moved on. It would be a long, long time before Oda properly sat us down and explained what awakening was and what it could do. So this whole horror show in the prison was quietly seeding an idea that wouldn't pay off for years. On a first read, it's just a scary fight. On a second read, knowing what you know, it's the foundation for one of the most important power systems in the series, sitting there unremarked at the bottom of the ocean. I always think that's a bit special. The answer was there the whole time. We just didn't have the question yet. The prison itself is quite something to picture, and it makes the beasts feel even more oppressive. Impel Down is built as descending circles of misery, each floor a different flavour of hell, a scorching one, a freezing one, a floor of endless spikes, a floor where the prisoners are simply left to starve. And the jailer beasts move through all of it like they own it, because they do. Minotaurus in particular becomes this recurring nightmare during Luffy's time down there, turning up again and again across different levels, and every time he's a bit more battered from the last encounter, and every time he's healed right back up and ready to go. That repetition is really the point. You don't beat him, you survive him, and then he's back. And that honestly is the detail from this whole section I'd ask you to carry forward, because it comes up with almost every awakened Zoan we meet later. The recovery, strength and speed are frightening, but plenty of characters are strong and fast. It's the healing that makes an awakened Zoan feel less like an opponent and more like a problem that won't go away. The beasts were the first, ugliest demonstration of that, down at the bottom of the sea where nobody was meant to be watching. Now the beasts are the raw, joyless, no control version of all this, which makes the next person on our list A real change of gears, because he's the exact opposite. Someone who awakened on purpose, kept every bit of his mind, and used it to do something that redefined what a paramecia could even be. And he did it, naturally, while wearing a bright pink feather coat, because of course he did. Let me paint the scene this one arrives in, because it's a good one. Dressrosa, a sunny, gorgeous kingdom that looks like a postcard, all colour and music, and gladiator arenas, and sitting on top of it is Don Quixote do Flamingo, who might be one of the best villains the series ever produced. He's charming in that deeply unsettling way, always grinning, always in the pink coat and the sunglasses, and he runs the whole country like a puppet show, which, as it turns out, is not just a metaphor. Doflamingo ate the string fruit, the ito no mi, and on paper it sounds almost underwhelming. Strings. He controls string, but it's one of those fruits where the more you sit with it, the more horrifying it gets, because of how completely he's mastered it. He produces these threads, fine as spider silk and strong as steel cable, and he does absolutely everything with them. He slices clean through stone and people. He hangs in the sky by hooking his strings onto the clouds, which is how a man with no flying power spends half his fights, floating serenely out of reach. He makes clones of himself, out of string. And the really nasty one, he threads his strings into other people's bodies and works them like marionettes, walking them around, making them fight their own friends, all with a little flick of the fingers. There's a reason his whole kingdom is built on the idea of everyone dancing on his strings without knowing it. So he's already terrifying before we get anywhere near awakening. It's in his fight against Luffy and Law that he pulls out what he actually calls his trump card. And this is the moment, for a lot of us watching, where awakening finally got its proper introduction. Not a rumour, not a prison monster, a named power from a major character, explained as he uses it. Here's what awakening does for him, and this is the paramecia template I said I'd explain properly. So pay attention here, because I'll only be pointing back at this later, not laying it all out again. Before awakening, a paramecia power is about you. Doflamingo makes strings out of himself, essentially, and controls them. After awakening, the power reaches off his body and onto the world. He can turn his surroundings into string. The buildings, the road under your feet, the rubble, the walls, whole chunks of the city, all of it becomes his material. Threads he can move and control, without him having had to produce a single one of them himself. That's the pattern for awakened paramecia across the board. Your power stops being a thing you carry and becomes a property you can paint onto everything around you. The environment itself turns into your weapon. And once you understand that, his signature, move lands completely differently. The bird cage. This is the big one, the technique the whole Dressrosa arc builds toward. Doflamingo throws up an enormous dome of razor strings over the entire island, trapping everyone inside, and then he slowly begins to shrink it, dragging those blades inward to grind the whole place and everyone on it into nothing. It's genuinely one of the most oppressive threats in the series, a giant closing fist made of wire. Now here's a nice little wrinkle I like to point out. The birdcage isn't, strictly speaking, an awakened technique. He could theoretically make that much string the ordinary way, but being able to turn the surroundings into string on top of his own production means throwing around that quantity of material becomes trivial for him. The awakening doesn't invent the birdcage. It just makes a man who could already do frightening things able to do them at the scale of an entire country without breaking a sweat. That's a subtle distinction, and I think it's a really elegant one. Awakening here isn't a brand new trick. It's an upgrade to the sheer volume and reach of what he already had. One thing that always struck me about Doflamingo's awakening is that we never actually see him earn it. There's no training montage, no moment where he unlocks it. By the time we meet him, he's just had it for years. He got his fruit young, and he's the kind of person who spent his entire cruel life leaning on this power. So by the time the story catches up with him, the awakening is old news to him. He's not showing off a new skill, he's reaching for something he's had in his back pocket the whole time, which fits that trump card idea perfectly. You don't wave your last resort around, you keep it quiet until the fight that actually matters. I've got a soft spot for Doflamingo as the character who taught the audience what awakening is, because he's such a good teacher for it, in a horrible way. The power is visually clear. You can see the ground turning to thread. You can see the scale. And because he's a villain and a smug one, he's happy to explain exactly what he's doing while he does it, which is enormously helpful for a reader trying to grasp a brand new concept. If awakening had been introduced through some quiet, humble hero, I'm not sure it would have clicked as hard. It needed a showman, and Doflamingo, if nothing else, is a showman. Fun detail to sit with. Because we never saw him awaken, we don't actually know how long he's had it, and that opens up this quietly chilling possibility that he's been an awakened user through most of the events we'd already watched him take part in. All those earlier appearances, that whole reputation, built on a level of power the reader didn't even have a name for yet. Same trick as the prison beasts in a way. The information was sitting there in front of us, we just weren't equipped to read it. A couple more details on him while we're here, because they're the sort of thing that makes his fight so memorable. Once he's awakened and turning the surroundings to thread, he starts producing these enormous constructs that just aren't possible at his normal scale. There's a great looming clone he builds, and there are these thick, hardened blades of string he throws around, one of which is basically a divine-sounding finishing move, made of 16 unbelievably dense threads. The names are all suitably dramatic, but the through line is the same. Awakening let him make constructs so big and so numerous that a normal string user could only dream of them. And there's the horribly practical side of it too. Because he can turn things into string, he can also stitch himself back together. Take him apart and he threads himself up like a rag doll and keeps going. It makes him maddeningly difficult to actually finish off, which, combined with the birdcage slowly shrinking overhead, gives that whole final stretch of Dressrosa this exhausting, grinding quality, like fighting a man who won't stay broken while the walls close in. The birdcage deserves one more moment, actually, because of how cruel it is as an idea. It's not just a trap. Doflamingo speeds it up whenever the citizens of the island try to help Luffy, so their instinct to fight back literally accelerates their own destruction. He's using the island against itself, which is the whole story of how he ruled the place, out in the open now as a physical object made of wire. He'd been puppeteering that country quietly for a decade. The birdcage is just the mask coming off. One thing to know too is that Doflamingo isn't some lowborn thug who clawed his way up. He was born into the highest nobility in the world, one of the very families the five elders sit above, and he fell from that height as a child in a way that twisted him permanently. So there's this dark thread connecting him to the people at the very top of everything, the same people we'll get to later who turn into demons. He's a fallen version of that aristocracy, running his own little kingdom of strings, the way the ones he came from run the whole world. I mention it because it's easy to file him away as a colourful one-off villain, and he's more than that. He's a preview, in miniature, of the kind of power and cruelty that sits at the top of this world, just done in pink feathers, on a single island, instead of from a throne room nobody's allowed to see. Anyway, that's the blueprint. Turn the world into your material. And the very next person we're going to talk about took that exact idea and ran somewhere strange and specific, and honestly quite funny with it, because where Doflamingo turned the ground into razor wire, this next fellow turned it into a dessert. Whole Cake Island is one of my favourite places in the whole series to just look at. It's Big Mom's territory, and it's this enormous, garish, edible wonderland. Castles made of cake, rivers of juice, forests where the trees have faces and opinions. Everything's a sweet. And in the middle of all that, sugar sits one of the most quietly serious characters the story has given us, Charlotte Katakuri. Big Mum's second son, the muscle of the family, and a man with a reputation so clean that people genuinely believe he's never once been knocked onto his back in a fight, never taken a hit to the spine, never lost. That reputation matters, so hold on to it. To place him a bit, Big Mum's family is enormous, dozens upon dozens of children, all folded into this sprawling pirate empire, built on marriage alliances and sweets and fear. And in that whole tangled brood, Katakuri is the one everyone relies on. The steady, dutiful, eldest brother figure, who holds the line so the others don't have to. He's the pillar, the one the family's reputation quietly leans on, which makes his personal insecurity and the way his fight with Luffy chips at that flawless image hit all the harder. Because he's not just protecting himself, he's protecting the idea of himself that an entire family depends on. There's a lot going on under the calm surface of a man made of rice cake, is what I'm saying. Katakuri ate the mochi mochi fruit, and I want to spend a proper minute on this fruit before we even get to awakening, because it's a strange and lovely one. Mochi, if you've not had it, is this soft, stretchy, sticky Japanese rice cake, chewy and pliable, and a bit gluey. So at first glance, Katakuri's power is that he can make and control mochi, which sounds about as threatening as a dessert trolley. But watch what he actually does with it. He stretches his own body like the stuff. He reshapes himself, flows around attacks, sprouts arms, turns his limbs into these vicious spiked ropes of hardened mochi. He fills a whole room with it, traps people, drowns them in it. And here's the clever bit, the thing that makes his fruit special, and I mean that literally, because the term the series uses is a special paramecia. Mochi is sticky. It can grab things, coat things, cling, which means Katakuri can do something most paramecia users can't. He can let attacks pass through him almost the way a Logia user does, flowing his mochi body out of the way and reforming. That intangibility, that slipperiness, is normally a Logia trick. His is a paramecia that borrowed one of the best perks off the fruit type next door. So he sits in this rare in-between category, a paramecia that behaves, in the moment, a bit like a Logia. It's a genuinely unusual fruit, and it's part of why he's so maddeningly hard to land a hit on. The other reason he's hard to hit has nothing to do with mochi at all. It's his observation haki. Katakuri's is so refined that he can see a few seconds into the future. He watches your attack land before you've thrown it, and simply isn't standing there when it arrives. Combine future sight with a body that can flow out of the way like sticky rice, and you've got someone who is, for a long stretch of his fight with Luffy, essentially untouchable. That fight, by the way, happens largely in a mirror world, this reflective dimension you can step into through any mirror, and that's the setting where the awakening finally shows up. When Katakuri awakens his mochi mochi fruit, he does exactly what our paramecia template says he should. He pushes the power off his own body and onto the surroundings. The floor of the mirror world, the walls, the ground itself, all of it becomes mochi under his command. And I won't relabor how that template works because we went through it properly with Doflamingo, but the flavour of it here, if you'll forgive the pun, is that the whole battlefield turns against you. The ground goes soft and grabs your feet. A wall lunges out as a fist. There's nowhere neutral to stand, because everything around you is now made of the one substance he controls completely. What I love is how different this feels from Doflamingo, despite being mechanically the same idea. Doflamingo's environment string is cold and industrial, all wire and slicing. Katakuri's mochi is soft and smothering, and weirdly organic. Same rule, turn the world into your material, but two completely different textures of nightmare. That's good design. The template gives structure, and then each character's actual power gives it personality. Now, the part of Katakuri's story that everyone remembers isn't really the awakening at all, it's the honour. During the fight, Luffy manages to injure him, and in doing so, exposes something Katakuri hides from everyone: his mouth, which is scarred into this wide, jagged shape he's deeply ashamed of. And when the moment comes that Katakuri finally lands a knockdown on Luffy, he realizes Luffy is lying flat on his back, at a disadvantage, the exact loss of dignity Katakuri built his whole reputation on never suffering. So Katakuri lies down too. He puts himself on his own back on purpose, so the fight stays even. He'd rather give up his flawless record than win it cheaply. I think that's one of the most quietly moving things a villain has done in this series, and it has absolutely nothing to do with Mochi, but it's why he sticks with people. Fun little thing to chew on, and I'll stop with the Mochi puns after this, promise. The special Paramecia label is rarer than awakening itself in some ways. There are only a couple of fruits ever described that way, and the fact that Katakuri sits so close to the Logia border makes his awakening a useful thing to think about, because it shows the categories in this world aren't neat little boxes, they bleed into each other. A Paramecia can act like a Logia. An awakened Paramecia can rewrite a room. The lines are blurrier than the tidy 3-type explanation makes them sound, and I rather like that the story lets them be messy. A few more things about him, because he's one of those characters who rewards a bit of lingering. That flawless reputation I mentioned isn't just talk, it's tied to a genuinely human insecurity. Katakuri hides his scarred mouth from everyone, and the one time we see him truly alone, he's sitting in private, stuffing his face with donuts, dropping the perfect composure entirely. It's a small, oddly tender detail. This terrifying, undefeated warlord of a man, and his big secret is that he eats sweets in private and is embarrassed about his face. It humanizes him more than any fight could. His actual combat, awakening aside, is a beautiful mix of that Mochi control and hardening haki, coating his Mochi limbs so they hit like iron, throwing out these vicious spiraling strikes, even setting the stuff alight. But the reason his fight with Luffy matters so much to the wider story isn't the Mochi at all. It's the schooling he gives Luffy in observation haki. It's fighting Katakuri, and specifically getting battered by a man who can see the future, that pushes Luffy into developing his own early version of that future sight. So Katakuri isn't just an obstacle, he's a teacher in the harsh way this series often does teaching, by nearly beating the lesson into you. And the two of them part on real mutual respect, which is why so many people rank this among their favourite fights in the series. It's got the strange fruit, the awakening, the future sight, and underneath all of it, two proud men who end up genuinely admiring each other. Not bad for a bloke whose power is rice cake. So that's two awakenings that both work by turning the surroundings into the user's substance, which makes it the perfect moment to head over to Wano, where two more users awakened at almost the same time, in the same fight, against the same opponent, and yet went in nearly opposite directions with it. One of them made his power more intricate and surgical than ever, the other made his simpler than it had ever been, and somehow more brutal for it. Wano is the big one. Wano is the long arc, the samurai country, the war on Onigashima, where half the story's heavy hitters end up throwing hands in the same night. And in the middle of all that, two of the younger captains, Trafalgar Law and Eustace Kidd, find themselves stuck fighting Big Mom, one of the four emperors, a woman who is essentially a natural disaster in a dress. And it's during that fight that both of them awaken their devil fruits, more or less at the same time, which makes them a lovely pair to talk about together, because they took the same milestone and used it in completely opposite ways. Let's start with Law, because his fruit is one of the most sought after objects in the entire world. He ate the Op fruit, the Ope Ope no Mi, and it's sometimes called the ultimate devil fruit, which is a big claim in a world with this many powers. Here's why. Law can create a sphere, an area he calls a room, and inside that room he has total control over everything. He can cut things apart without hurting them, slicing a person into pieces that stay alive and talking. He can swap objects and people around instantly, teleporting them across the space with a gesture. He can rearrange a battlefield like a surgeon rearranging things on a tray, which is fitting because the fruit is deeply medical. That's the other half of it. The op fruit is the doctor's fruit. It can perform impossible operations, transplant things, fix things, and famously, it can perform one particular surgery that grants another person eternal life, at the cost of the user's own. That immortality operation is a huge deal in the lore, and a big part of why everyone wants this fruit so badly. It's the sort of power people build entire wars around, the promise of never dying, and it hangs over lore's whole story. There's a real weight to the fact that this fruit ended up with him specifically, a man whose past is soaked in death and loss, carrying around the one power that could grant eternal life to somebody else at the price of his own. He is, in a sense, walking around with a gift he'd have to give away entirely to use. That's a heavy thing to hand a character, and it colours everything about him. This quiet, guarded surgeon, sitting on the most coveted power in the world, and treating it less like a prize than a responsibility. So Lore is already a Swiss Army knife of a fighter before awakening. His base kit is enormous. When he awakens, the change is exactly what we'd expect from a paramecia, and I won't walk through the template again. We did that with Doflamingo, but the specific shape it takes for Lore is gorgeous. He can attach his room, and the power that comes with it, to objects and other people without being inside the room himself. He wraps his ability around his sword, around his enemy, around things at a distance. Against Big Mum, this is how he gets past her defences, reaching his surgical power through her guard to strike at her directly. He even develops a technique that mimics an ability from another fruit entirely, the calm-inducing power his old mentor once had. Awakening didn't make Lore simpler. It made him more precise, more surgical, more able to apply his scalpel to things he couldn't reach before. Now compare that with Kid, right next to him, doing the exact opposite. Eustace Kid ate the magnet fruit, the Jicky no Me, and it does what it says on the tin. He controls magnetism. In his base form, this mostly means he yanks metal around, pulls it toward him from all over a battlefield, and welds it into these big brutal weapons and machines. His whole aesthetic is scrapyard mecha, giant iron arms and improvised cannons, and he even rebuilds his own missing arm out of scrap metal on the regular, which is either very metal or very worrying depending on how you look at it. It's a straightforward, blunt instrument sort of power. Grab metal, hit people with metal. Kid's a good foil for Lore in temperament too, not just in fruit. Where Lore is measured and surgical and keeps his cards close, Kid is loud, reckless, furious, the sort who solves problems by hitting them harder until they stop being problems. He and Luffy actually go all the way back to the same early moment in the series, when a whole batch of promising young pirates, Kid and Lore among them, first showed up as the up-and-coming generation to watch. So there's real history in seeing these two, once just names on a list of rookies, standing in a fight against an emperor and awakening to bring her down. It's the story cashing in years of quiet setup. The rookies grew up, and they grew up loud and prickly and brilliant, in Kid's case with a magnetic power that suits his whole smash-first personality right down to the ground. When Kid awakens, and here's the contrast I love, his power gets simpler, not more complicated. Awakened, he can assign a magnetic pole to any person or object. Slap a north on one thing and a north on another, and they violently repel. North and south, they slam together. He can turn people and objects into magnets, and then just let physics do the ugly work, dragging enormous masses of metal to crush whatever he's tagged. It's cruder than Lore's surgical business, by a mile. There's no finesse to it, but the raw force of it, and the control it gives him over where his enemy ends up, is genuinely greater than anything his base kit could manage. And that's the whole reason I like putting these two next to each other. We tend to assume awakening means More intricate, more clever, more options. Law fits that assumption, but Kid quietly proves it isn't a rule. Sometimes awakening strips a power down to something almost stupidly simple and just makes it hit like a falling building. Both of them tapped into the fuller ceiling of their fruits, exactly as Kaido described, and one ceiling happened to be delicate and one happened to be a sledgehammer. Same door, very different rooms on the other side. There's something a bit poetic about the two of them awakening together too, given their history. Law and Kid don't like each other much. They're rivals, prickly, constantly on the edge of turning on one another. And yet here they are, forced to cooperate against a monster neither could beat alone, and both crossing this enormous threshold in the same breath. Two very different men arriving at the same summit by different paths, and both a bit annoyed to find the other one there. If you made me pick which awakening I'd rather have, honestly, I'd take Law's, and it's not close. The versatility, the medical side, the ability to reach through anything, and the small matter of a fruit that can hand out immortality, it's just a deeper toolbox. But I completely understand anyone who'd rather have kids, because there's a purity to just being able to magnetize your enemy to a mountain of scrap and walk away. Different temperaments, different fruits. That's part of the fun of this world. The powers tend to suit the people who carry them. Quick honest note before we leave these two, because I try not to state things as settled when they aren't. That immortality surgery I mentioned, the one everybody wants Law's fruit for, we don't actually know for certain whether it requires awakening to pull off or not. It's never been cleanly shown on the page. So file that one under strong maybe, rather than confirmed fact. I'd rather tell you where the edges of my knowledge are than pretend the map's all filled in. Let me dwell for a second on what these two awakenings actually achieved together, because it's a genuinely big deal in the wider story. Big Mom is an emperor, a woman who had shrugged off everything thrown at her for the entire arc, and she gets taken down not by Luffy, not by some equally legendary figure, but by these two younger captains who awakened mid-fight, and then combined everything they had. Law finishes his part with an enormous spatial strike, driving his awakened power straight through her, and Kid pins her in place and hammers her with a colossal magnetic assault, dragging a mountain of iron down on top of her. Between the two of them, they manage what most of the world would have said was impossible for anyone of their generation, and I think that's the quiet significance of awakening as a story device. More than any single flashy technique, it's the mechanism that lets the next generation actually reach the old monsters. Without it, Law and Kid are strong, clever, dangerous, and still a clear tier below an emperor. With it, they can stand in the same fight and win. Awakening is partly how the story lets its younger characters climb up to where the legends live. Both of them are absolutely wrecked by the end of it, barely conscious, having emptied the tank completely. But they did it. Two rivals who can barely stand to be in the same room, awakening side by side and toppling a giant. There's something I really like about that, right? So far, every awakening we've covered has been either a zone cranking up the body or a paramecia painting itself onto the world. The next one broke both of those expectations at once, because it turned out the most famous devil fruit in the entire series, the one we thought we understood completely, was something else all along. For nearly the entire series, we all thought we knew Luffy's power inside out. He ate the gum fruit as a kid. It turned his body to rubber, and that was that. He stretches, he bounces, bullets don't do much to him. He winds his arm up like an elastic band and throws a punch from half a mile away. It's the first power the series ever introduced, right there in Chapter 1. And for hundreds and hundreds of chapters, it was just, well, rubber. A funny, flexible, slightly silly power that a funny, flexible, slightly silly boy grew increasingly creative with. And over the years, he did get creative. He invented his gears, these self-imposed techniques where he'd pump himself up or compress himself down to hit harder and move faster. He layered on haki. He kept finding new corners of the rubber to exploit, but it always stayed within the rules of being a paramecia, a power about his own body, never quite tipping over into the total reality-bending control that a special fruit might have. Close sometimes, but not over the line. Then comes Wano and the fight with Kaido, and Luffy dies, sort of. His heart stops, and in the moment right before it does, something strange happens. His heartbeat picks up a new rhythm, described as the drums of liberation, and his body comes roaring back changed. His hair goes white, his clothes bleach, and he stands up wearing this enormous, delighted grin, laughing, and the whole feel of him is different. He's not straining anymore. He looks like he's playing. That's Gear 5. And it turns out it isn't a gear at all in the usual sense. It's an awakening. Here's the reveal that recasts everything, and it's a big one. So let's sit with it. The Gum Gum fruit was never really the Gum Gum fruit. Its true name is the human fruit. Model, Nika. It's a mythical zone. The rubber was almost a disguise, a side effect that let the world overlook what it actually was, which is the fruit of a legendary figure called Nika, a sun god, a warrior of liberation. From old stories, someone who was said to make people laugh and free them from suffering. The most famous, most seen power in the entire series had a secret identity the whole time, and it was hiding as a joke. So what does the awakening actually do? In Gear 5, Luffy gets a level of control over his rubber body that goes past physics and into cartoon logic. And I mean that almost literally. He becomes like an old rubber hose cartoon character. The kind that can swell to the size of a building, flatten into a sheet, run on air, catch a cannonball, and blow it back like bubblegum. The rules stop applying to him. And crucially, and this is the awakened part, he doesn't just apply that cartoon logic to himself. He applies it to his surroundings and to other people. He turns the ground rubbery so it bounces enemies away. He grabs lightning like it's a physical rope. He makes a person's body react to his imagination rather than to reason. It's the most freeing, most unhinged power in the series, and it fits perfectly, because the whole idea of Nika is freedom. The fruit doesn't just make him strong, it makes him unbound. Now remember the warning we got from the prison beasts, the one about Zoan awakening being dangerous. The animals will potentially swallowing the person. I said I'd nod back to it, and here's the nod. Gear 5 does carry a version of that. Luffy's personality shifts in it. He gets giddier, more childlike, more purely joyful, and you can feel the fruit's nature pushing through him. But here's the beautiful inversion. For most Zoans, the fruit's personality bleeding into you is a threat, a loss of self. For Nika, the fruit's personality is joy and freedom, and Luffy is already the most joyful, most freedom-obsessed person alive. So instead of erasing him, the fruit amplifies exactly who he already was. The thing that destroyed the jailer beasts is, for him, just turning the volume up on his own soul. I think that's one of the loveliest ideas in the series, honestly. The same mechanism, the same risk, and it lands completely differently, depending on who's carrying it and whether the fruit's heart matches theirs. There's also a recovery angle worth mentioning, because it's part of why the awakening kicks in when it does. It doesn't come out because Luffy commands it. It surfaces at the exact moment his body needs to heal the most, when he's basically finished. And that fits the Zoan template of accelerated recovery. Awakening, for him, arrives as a kind of resurrection. He needed to come back, and the fruit brought him back as its truest self. Fun detail, and this one's got weight to it. The reason nobody knew what this fruit was is that the world government worked very hard for a very long time to keep it hidden. They renamed it. They chased it. Its true name and the legend attached to it were the sort of thing the people in charge would rather the world never remembered, because a god of liberation is a dangerous idea if you're the ones people might want liberating from. So for around 800 years, one of the most important powers in existence was filed away under a boring name and mostly ignored, precisely because whoever controlled it didn't want anyone looking too closely. Same trick we've seen all through tonight, the truth sitting right there in the open, mislabeled on purpose. Except this time the mislabeling was policy. I'll admit this is the awakening that gets me the most, and not because it's the strongest, though it might be. It's the emotional turn of it. To have the very first power you were ever shown, the one you assumed was simple, revealed to be the heart of the entire story, a god of freedom hiding inside a rubber boy. It recontextualizes the whole thing you've been watching. Every silly stretch and bounce from hundreds of chapters ago reads a little differently once you know what was actually sleeping in there. That's a hard trick to pull off in a story this long, and Oda landed it. There's a whole layer of mythology stacked underneath this too, and we may as well wander through it since we've no reason to hurry. Nika isn't just some random god the fruit is named after. The story ties this figure to a name that's been floating around the series for ages, Joy Boy, a person from the lost history of the world who was, in some sense, a liberator, someone the oppressed have been waiting to return for centuries. And the suggestion is that whoever awakens this fruit and lives up to it inherits that mantle. So Luffy standing up laughing in Gear 5 isn't only a power spike, it's the story quietly telling you that the daft, kind, freedom-loving boy you followed for hundreds of chapters is the return of a promise made lifetimes ago. That's a lot of weight to hang on a rubber punch, and somehow it holds. The fruit's own behaviour over the years fits that, if you look back. There's this eerie detail that the fruit seemed to have a will of its own about staying free. It slipped out of the government's hands and stayed out of reach for a very long time, as if it were actively dodging the people who wanted to lock it away, right up until it found its way to a boy who'd never let anyone cage him, which loops us right back to that idea from the very beginning, that the fruits have a will. Nika's will, apparently, is to not be owned. It found the one person on the seas whose entire personality is the same wish. The way the transformation is framed leans hard into that mythology, and it's a lovely bit of staging. His heartbeat shifts into a rhythm the story calls the drums of liberation. This steady, joyful beat, almost like distant festival music. And it's that rhythm, more than any technique, that seems to be the true signature of the fruit waking up. Nika, in the old tales, was said to be a warrior who fought with a smile and freed people from their suffering, and everything about awakened Luffy is built to echo that. The laughter, the impossible playfulness, the sense that he's not fighting so much as refusing to take the enemy's rules seriously. It's the story dressing a power-up in the clothes of a folk hero, so that when Luffy stands up grinning, you're not just watching him get stronger, you're watching a legend the world was told to forget come walking back into the room to the sound of its own drum. When the truth about the fruit's name finally gets laid out, it's the world's own scientists and rulers doing the explaining, the people who spent all that time pretending it was nothing. And the way they say it, with something close to fear, tells you how much they'd invested in keeping it buried. A power that makes people laugh and sets them free is, from the point of view of anyone sitting on a throne, one of the most threatening things imaginable. Easier to file it under a boring name about rubber and hope, nobody notices what it actually is. As for the awakened form in action, it's just relentless invention. He goes enormous, big as a building, and trades blows with a dragon at a scale that reshapes the landscape. He grabs the dragon and treats him like rubber too, stretching him, bouncing him, applying his own cartoon logic to an enemy who very much did not consent to becoming stretchy. He runs across the sky as if the air had turned solid under his feet. Every technique feels improvised, like a child who's just realised the rules were fake the whole time and is testing exactly how far that goes. Which again is the point. Freedom isn't a tidy power. It's a messy, joyful, anything goes power. And the awakening lets him live entirely inside that for the length of a fight. It does build to genuine finishers, mind. The big one against Kaido is an island-sized fist, an enormous, haki-hardened punch, swelled up to a scale that matches the dragon he's fighting. And it's the sort of climactic image the whole arc had been promising. And it's not a one-off either. Gear 5 comes back on Egghead, where he uses it against Lucci, and even trades blows with one of the admirals. And by then he's clearly steadier with it, holding the form longer and reaching for it more deliberately than that first desperate, half-dead activation in Wano. There is a cost though, which is worth being honest about, because otherwise it sounds like a get-out-of-jail card. Early on especially, Gear 5 drained him badly, and when it ran out, he'd drop into a shriveled, exhausted state, wide open and barely able to stand. Awakening isn't free for him any more than it is for anyone. It's an enormous burst of his fullest self, and burning that bright takes something out of him. The more he grows into it, the better he handles that, but the tank still empties, which keeps even the god of liberation from being invincible. That white smoke, the awakened sash, is a bright and cheerful thing on Luffy. But not every version of it is. Over on the same island where our next characters awaken, there's a mirror image of that smoke. The same ribbon, but dark, and the men wearing it are about as far from joyful liberation as you can get. So let's head to Egghead. Not every awakening is a fireworks display. Some of them are quiet, almost modest, and if you weren't paying attention, you might not even register that anything had changed. And I think those ones are secretly the most useful to look at, because when a power gets simpler in awakening rather than flashier, you can see the underlying mechanic more clearly. So let's talk about two old faces who turn up on Egghead Island, working for the government's secret assassin unit, CP0, Rob Lucci and Kaku. If you go all the way back to the early days of the series, you'll remember both of these two, because they were villains in the Water 7 and Enies Lobby arcs, back when the Straw Hats were much smaller fish. Lucci especially left a mark. He's a cold, quiet, genuinely frightening assassin, the sort who barely raises his voice while doing terrible things. And back then, both he and Kaku ate devil fruits, both Zoans, and they've spent the many years since getting stronger in the shadows. When they resurface on Egghead, they've both awakened. Lucci ate the cat fruit, model leopard. It's a very clean, very straightforward Zoan, the kind that gives you a few forms, a full beast leopard, a human-beast hybrid, and lets you switch between them for whatever the situation needs. Like most Zoan users worth their salt, Lucci favours the hybrid form in a fight, because it's the best of both, human cleverness with animal speed and power. And here's the honest, almost funny thing about his awakening. It doesn't really give him anything new. No new techniques, no wild new abilities. What it does is make everything he already had more so, stronger, faster, and that regeneration we keep coming back to, quicker than ever. He's just a sharper, more durable, more dangerous version of the leopard he always was, and that turns out to be enough to matter. When he clashes with the awakened Luffy with Gear 5 in full swing, Lucci can actually hold him off. Only for a short while, mind. He's not beating a mythical Zoan god of liberation. Let's be realistic. But the fact that an awakened regular Zoan can stand in front of that for even a moment tells you how much awakening is doing under the hood, even when it doesn't come with a shiny new trick. He fares a bit better trading blows with Zoro too, which feels about right. One thing I appreciate about Lucci is that he doesn't struggle with the personality risk at all, the thing that wrecked the prison beasts. And there's a slightly grim joke in why Lucci's own nature already suits the leopard. He's a predator as a person, cold and lethal, so the fruit's animal well, doesn't have to fight him for the wheel. They were already pointed the same direction, which, if you think about it, is a darker echo of what we just said about Luffy. The fruit amplifies who you already are. For Luffy, that meant joy. For Lucci, it means he's an even better killer. Same rule, and the rule doesn't care whether you're nice. Then there's Kaku, and Kaku's a slightly warmer story, or at least a more relatable one. He ate the ox fruit, model, giraffe, which, and I say this with love, is one of the goofiest looking devil fruits in the whole series. A giraffe. This deadly government assassin turns into a giraffe. Even the characters in the story found it a bit much when it was first revealed. But awakened, it's genuinely formidable, and the thing it gives Kaku is this absurd freedom of control over his own body, especially that long neck, which becomes ridiculously flexible and strong, whipping around like a battering ram on a spring. What I find lovely about Kaku is that when he first tries to use his awakening in a fight against Zoro, he's not good at it yet. He's clearly still getting the hang of it, fumbling, working out what this new level of his power can even do. He manages to use it to boost his other techniques, but you can see him figuring it out live. And that's rare, actually. Most awakened characters we meet arrive fully in command of it. Kaku we get to watch mid-learning curve, and then later we see him having clearly put in the work to master it. He doesn't even bother with the variety of forms he used to switch between, because now he's got such freer control that he doesn't need them. There's a real sense of a craftsman who practiced until the tool became part of his hand. And there's a small sad thread under Kaku, which is that he never especially wanted this life. He's an assassin because that's the path he ended up on, not out of any great passion for it. So watching him quietly grind away at mastering a difficult power out of nothing more than professional dedication has a slightly melancholy dignity to it. He's very good at a job he didn't choose, and he keeps getting better at it anyway. Fun detail, and it's really the reason I wanted to put these two together. The very plainness of their awakenings is the useful bit, because Lucci's gives no new techniques, just raw improvement, and Kaku's is mostly about control. You can see with total clarity what Zoan awakening actually is at its core, underneath all the spectacle. It's not new powers, it's the body catching up to the fruit and becoming a more complete, more durable, more controlled version of itself. Luffy's awakening is so enormous and reality-bending that it almost hides the basic mechanic under all the cartoon magic. Lucci and Kaku show you the plain version, and the plain version is quietly terrifying in its own right. To really appreciate how far these two have come, it helps to remember where we first met them. Back at Eni's lobby, Lucci was the final wall, the strongest of the government's old assassin squad, and his fight with Luffy was one of the defining battles of that whole era of the series. Luffy had to dig out brand new gears just to survive it, and it was close, genuinely close. Lucci nearly ended him. Kaku was up there too, one of the elite, and he fought with this bizarre, brilliant style where he'd turn his giraffe legs into extra sword arms, wielding 4 blades at once in a way that had no business working, as well as it did. So these aren't fresh faces who happen to awaken. They're masters who were already frightening the last time we saw them, and they've had years to layer awakening on top of an already deep set of skills. Lucci still has all the old tricks, the superhuman speed techniques, that devastating close-range shockwave finisher he was famous for. Kaku still has his swordsmanship. The awakening doesn't replace any of that. It sits underneath it, making the body that performs all those old techniques stronger, tougher, and quicker to heal. When you watch them on Egghead, you're really watching 2 veterans who took an already complete fighting style and quietly upgraded the engine underneath it. That's part of why even a short stand against Gear 5 is impressive. These men were never lightweights, and now they've grown into the fuller version of what they always were. Egghead itself is a real spectacle to have them return in, because the government has pulled out all the stops. Alongside these two, you've got the Seraphim, These artificial weapon children, built to mimic legendary fighters, and the whole island becomes this pressure cooker of government force closing in on the Straw Hats. Having Lucci and Kaku, faces from that early, defining Enies lobby conflict, come back awakened and slotted into that chaos, is the story quietly rewarding anyone who's been along for the whole ride. It's a reunion, in a way, just a very violent one. The boys who nearly stopped Luffy all those years ago, back again, upgraded, to see if they can do it now that everyone's a great deal stronger. Spoiler, the current Luffy is a different animal entirely, but you can feel the years of history in the matchup, and that history is a lot of what makes it land. I've got a bit of a soft spot for characters like these two. Honestly, the villains who don't get a redemption or a big tragic send-off. They just keep showing up, keep working, keep quietly getting stronger in the background between arcs. There's a kind of unglamorous dedication to it. Lucci and Kaku were never going to be the ones who saved the world or found true love. They're professionals, doing a hard job for people who don't deserve their loyalty, and they went and awakened their fruits anyway, because that's what being the best at their work required. That awakening, plain and undramatic as it is the result of years of that grind we never got to see, which in a funny way makes them a cleaner illustration of what awakening actually costs than any of the flashier examples. It costs time and dedication, most of it invisible, and these two paid it quietly off page and came back with the smoke to show for it. So that's awakening at human scale, kept small and sharp. The next group takes the exact same Zoan awakening, the smoke and all, and blows it up to the size of legends because the men we're about to meet don't turn into leopards or giraffes. They turn into demons out of folklore, and nobody's entirely sure what they even are. Every culture has its monsters. The things drawn on old scrolls to frighten children, half one animal and half another, dredged up out of folklore because a normal beast wasn't unsettling enough. And when the five elders finally stop being quiet old men in a room and stand up to fight on Egghead Island, that's exactly what they turn into. Not leopards or giraffes, demons out of legend, each one lifted straight from the sort of yokai tale you'd tell around a fire and then regret telling before bed. The five elders, or the Gorosei if you want the proper name, are the highest authority in the whole world, or at least they appear to be. Five ancient figures who sit at the very top of the world government, and have done for an extraordinarily long time, and for most of the series they do nothing physical at all. They're politics, they're the men who decide what gets erased from history. So when they finally transform, it's a genuine shift in what the story even is, because these dusty old rulers turn out to be some of the most physically terrifying beings we've ever seen. And every one of them wears that awakened smoke, the dark version of the sash, around their shoulders. Let's take them one at a time because they're worth it. The first to show up, and the one we know best, is J. Garcia Saturn. He arrives in the most theatrical way possible, emerging from a glowing pentagram burned into the ground. And when the smoke clears, he's this enormous nightmare with the lower body of a spider and the horned head of an ox. His form is drawn straight from a Japanese yokai called the Ushi Oni, an ox demon, and the name given for his power translates to something like Ox Ogre. He can spit poison. There's a moment where a marine simply meets his gaze against orders, and Saturn removes the man's head for it, which tells you everything about the register we're operating in now. This is not a leopard. Then there's Marcus Mars, the tallest of them, the one with the long white hair, and he turns into a colossal monstrous bird with a serpent's body and a horrible near-human face, full of teeth. His yokai is the Itsumaid, which apparently translates to something like until when, which is a genuinely eerie name for a creature when you sit with it. A bird whose name is a question about how long something will last. I don't know. That one stuck with me. The third is Saint Jupiter, and he's the odd one out of the group in a nice way. Because while the others are these composite ox, boar, horse and bird demons, Jew Peter simply becomes an enormous worm, a centipede-like beast burrowing under the island, and possibly drawn from old Japanese folklore about giant earth-dwelling monsters. There's something almost more unsettling about the plainness of it. The others are ornate horrors. Jew Peter is just a vast worm moving under your feet, tunnelling through the island, like the ground itself has turned against you, which is its own particular kind of nightmare. The one where there's nowhere solid to stand. And when the 5 of them move together on Egghead, the scale is genuinely oppressive. Mars flying overhead as that horrible serpent bird, Saturn stalking on his spider legs, Jew Peter surfacing and diving, all of them able to shrug off wounds and keep coming, all of them coordinating like a single, ancient organism with 5 heads. It's not really a fight so much as a siege, the defenders trying to survive contact with things that don't seem to obey the usual rules about staying down. That relentlessness, that sense of facing something that simply won't stop, is the same quality we first met in the prison beasts. Only here it's dressed in folklore and backed by the full weight of the people who run the world. The oldest, worst version of the thing we started the night with. The 4th is Topman Walkery, a broad, boar-like beast, and he's the one associated with the most raw physical force of the group, including an advanced conqueror's haki roar that can flatten people just by being loud enough. And the 5th is Ethan Baron Fi Nusjuro, the only one who fights with a sword, carrying himself like an old samurai, and he's the one who crosses blades with Zoro when the fighting breaks out. That matchup is a lovely one to give a swordsman fan, because it puts Zoro up against a blade-wielding member of the highest authority in the world, an impossibly old opponent, and lets us measure how far he's come by watching him stand against something that ancient. Nushuro is cold and precise and unbothered in a way that makes him feel genuinely dangerous, and pitting the crew's swordsman against him is exactly the kind of thoughtful pairing this series does so well. The right character meeting the right monster. Between the 5 of them you've got poison, flight, burrowing, brute force and swordsmanship, which is a suspiciously complete toolkit for 5 men to have divided up between them. There's a thread running through all 5 of those forms that I think is deliberate and quite clever. They're not lifted from one neat mythology, they're drawn from that broad well of old East Asian folklore, the yokai and the demons and the composite beasts that show up in scrolls and temple carvings, the sort of creatures old stories used to represent things that were dangerous and ancient and not quite of this world. And that fits the 5 elders perfectly, because that's exactly what they are within the story: dangerous, ancient, and increasingly looking like they're not quite from this world either. The choice to make the literal rulers of everything transform into literal demons is not subtle, and I mean that as a compliment. It's the story dropping the polite mask and showing you what it thinks these men actually are underneath the robes and the titles. And these forms are not for show. Saturn alone demonstrates a horrible little grab bag of abilities. That instant one-shot on the Marine who dared look at him. A regeneration that lets him shrug off wounds that would kill anyone else. Poison, the whole thing. War Cury's roar carries advanced Conqueror's haki, the rarest tier of the rarest kind of willpower in the series, able to knock people flat with sound alone. Which brings up a point worth making here, because it applies to the very top of the ladder generally. The strongest beings in this world don't rely on awakening by itself. They stack it with haki, and specifically with the advanced forms of it. Awakening is one trump card. That elite willpower is another. And the truly untouchable figure, Luffy himself for that matter, carries both at once. It's the combination that puts them so far above an ordinary fight, not any single power. Awakening is a huge part of what makes them terrifying, but it's never the whole story on its own. Now here's the part I actually find the most fascinating, and it's an honesty thing, so let me be careful with it. I've been calling these awakened devil fruits, and they've got every hallmark of it: the smoke, the mythical beast forms, the whole aesthetic that matches Luffy and the rest. But the manga's doing something quietly strange with them. For basically every other notable devil fruit in the series, we get a name and a clear explanation of the power. For the 5 elders, we only ever get the name of the beast, the yokai. We're never actually told the name of a devil fruit, and that omission has made a lot of readers wonder whether these are conventional devil fruits at all, because there are these little details that don't quite fit. The summoning pentagrams, the fact that their powers seem to reach beyond what a fruit should manage, sharing telepathy across long distances, regenerating from grievous injuries, opening what look like portals to teleport each other across vast distances in moments. And at one point, the shadowy figure sitting above even them appears to be able to switch Saturn's power off, to strip it from him, which is not how a devil fruit is supposed to work at all. A fruit is part of you. You don't get it revoked. So the honest state of things is this: the 5 elders might be users of a special new category of devil fruit, some kind of demon mythical zone, possibly made or granted artificially by whoever truly rules this world. Or they might be something else entirely, something we don't have a word for yet, dressed up to look like awakening. The story hasn't told us, and I want to be straight about that rather than pretend the answer's settled, because it isn't. What we can say is that they carry the smoke, they turn into folklore monsters, and they've held the same forms and the same faces for well over 2 centuries, which puts them in a category of longevity all their own. Their line traces back to the group that founded the current world order in the first place, the alliance of kingdoms that set the whole system up, and the elders are what's left standing at the top of that arrangement all these generations later. Whether that unnatural lifespan is a side effect of their power, or the reason they were chosen for it, or something granted from that throne above them, is one more thing the story keeps close to its chest. But it does mean that when they finally stood up and transformed, we were watching creatures who had been quietly running things since before nearly every other character in the series was born. That's a genuinely unsettling amount of history to have hiding in a handful of robes. I'll be honest, I love that we don't fully know. A lot of people find the ambiguity around the elders frustrating, and I get it. We've had a nice tidy system all the way through. And here at the top of the world, it goes a bit blurry, but I think that's the point. These are the people who decide what's true and what gets erased. Of course the rules go strange around them. Of course we don't get a clean label. The uncertainty isn't a gap in the story. It's the story telling you that you've reached the part of the world where the ordinary rules stop applying. There's a bit of context that makes the elders even stranger, and it's a nice, gentle thing to wander off into. For most of the series, the highest-ranking nobles of this world, the ones who consider themselves above everyone, are portrayed as fairly pathetic, spoiled, cruel, physically weak, hiding behind bodyguards. So the 5 elders being not just powerful but genuinely among the most dangerous beings on the board is a real twist on that. They're the exception that upends the whole aristocracy. And they answer to someone. There's a throne above even them, and a figure who sits on it that they kneel to, and it's this figure who seems able to hand out and take back power in ways that shouldn't be possible. So the elders aren't the top. They're the enforcers for whatever the top actually is. Their job, when you strip away the monster forms, is chilling in its plainness. They decide what gets erased from history. That's their function. They are the editors of the truth, and they've been at it since long before anyone alive can remember. Once you know that, the ambiguity around their powers reads almost like a theme rather than a gap. The people who erase history are themselves half erased, blurred, unnamed even in their abilities. And we did get warnings before Egghead that they were more than politicians. There was an earlier moment where a couple of them struck at people from a great distance in a way that made no sense at the time. A flash of something that hinted the dusty old men in the throne room had teeth. Egghead was just the full reveal of what that flash had been pointing at. So that's awakening at its grandest and its most mysterious, which leaves us with a small pile of odds and ends, the awakenings that don't slot neatly anywhere else, including one that's so perfectly on theme for a night like this that I saved it for last on purpose. Because there is, of all things, a fruit whose entire power is about putting people to sleep. There's a character introduced in the more recent stretch of the story, over in the land of the giants, called St. Rimoshifu Killingham. He's one of the gods' knights, a group of elite figures serving the very top of the world, and I want to talk about him first here, purely because his power is almost too fitting for what we're doing tonight. His devil fruit puts people to sleep, and then makes their dreams real. His fruit is a mythical zoan, a dragon type, and we know it's awakened because he wears the smoke, that floating sash we've been tracking all the way through. But we've only seen him in his partial transformation so far, and interestingly, he seems to just live in that form, keeping it on even while he's eating, which is the sort of casual, unbothered detail that tells you a character is completely at home in their power. No struggle with the animals, will there? He and the fruit are old friends. The group he belongs to deserves a mention, because it's one of the newer, more mysterious pieces on the board. The Gods' Knights are an elite order serving the very highest authority in the world, the throne we talked about that even the 5 elders answer to. They'd been referred to for a while before we actually met any of them, this shadowy, almost mythic-sounding order, and Killingham is one of the first we've seen in action. So he arrives carrying that whole air of the endgame with him, a servant of the real power at the top, wearing a dragon fruit whose gift is sleep and dreams. There's something fitting about the top of this world, employing a man who can walk around inside your nightmares. Whatever else the Gods' Knights turn out to be, opening with a dream weaver was a properly ominous choice. The power itself is a lovely, strange thing. He can send people to sleep, and while they're under, he can make their dreams take physical shape in the real world. And it works both ways. A pleasant dream, sure, but also a nightmare, dragged out of someone's head and made solid enough to hurt. There's even a suggestion he can hold people in a kind of sleep paralysis, that horrible state where you're aware but you can't move. We haven't seen the full ceiling of it yet, and the things he conjures don't seem especially sturdy so far. But the manga hasn't really tested it properly, so a lot of this fruit is still a promise rather than a demonstration. I find it a genuinely poetic power to have floating around near the end of a list like this. Everything else we've covered is about force, about turning the world to string or mochi or magnetizing your enemy to a wall. And then there's this one man whose entire gift is putting others to sleep and walking around inside what they find there. It's the quietest awakening on the whole list, and there's something nice about ending the loud parade of monsters on a fruit that's all about dreams. Now, a couple of loose threads to tidy up while we're winding down, because they're the sort of thing that comes up if you go looking, and I'd rather address them than leave them dangling. The first is Kaido, the strongest creature in the world, the great dragon of Wano who ate the fish fruit. Model, Azure Dragon, a mythical zoan that lets him become an enormous serpentine dragon, and among other things, make the weather do what he wants. And you'd assume, given how absurdly powerful he is, that his fruit must be awakened. But here's the honest, slightly surprising truth. It's actually debated whether it is. He never clearly shows the tell, and remember, it was Kaido himself who explained awakening to us, in the middle of watching Luffy do it, which is a strange thing to narrate if you'd already achieved it yourself. Some readers are convinced he's awakened, and simply doesn't show it in an obvious way. Others think the strongest creature alive somehow never quite crossed that particular line. I lean towards it being genuinely unresolved, and I think it's a lovely little reminder that raw strength and awakening aren't the same thing. You can be the most powerful being on the map and still have a door you never walked through. It's worth painting Kaido properly, because he's such a monster that the question is genuinely surprising. In his dragon form, he's this vast serpentine thing coiling through the sky, and he can generate what are called flame clouds, clouds solid enough to lift an entire island off the ground and hold it in the air, which is exactly the sort of world-ending stunt Wano is built around. He bends the weather, throws lightning and blasts of wind, and his body is so absurdly durable that he's spent his whole life more or less unable to die, to the point where he seeks out danger just to feel something. He's called the strongest creature in the world, and the title isn't hype, it's roughly accurate. So you'd think, surely, a being like that must have awakened. And the reason I keep landing on unresolved rather than yes is that little narration moment. It's Kaido who calmly explains to us, and to Luffy, what awakening is. At the exact moment, Luffy achieves it. Now you could read that two ways. Maybe he understands it so well because he's been there himself and simply doesn't bother displaying the smoke. Or maybe he understands it the way a scholar understands a mountain he's never climbed, from study and observation rather than experience. The series lets both readings breathe and never plants a flag, which for the strongest creature alive is a strangely poetic loose end. The most powerful body in the world, and a door we can't confirm he ever opened. The second thread is a fun bit of fan speculation rather than anything the story confirms, and I'll flag it clearly as such. Our own little straw hat doctor, Chopper, has this thing called the Rumble Ball, a drug he made himself that unlocks extra transformations from his fruit, and in a real pinch he can reach a giant monster point. And some fans have wondered, half seriously, whether that's Chopper hacking his way to a sort of artificial awakening through chemistry, forcing his body past what it's ready for. It's a charming idea, and it lines up loosely with that theme of the body catching up to the fruit, except Chopper's cheating and using a pill to skip the years of growth. I wouldn't call it canon awakening by any stretch, but it's the kind of thing that's fun to turn over at 1 a.m, which is exactly the hour we're keeping. What makes the idea slightly more than idle, if you squint, is how dangerous that monster point transformation used to be for him. In the early days, reaching it meant losing control entirely, becoming this rampaging giant beast that couldn't tell friend from enemy, which rhymes uncomfortably with the fate of those prison beasts. The animal will swallowing the person. Chopper eventually reworks his drug and his own limits, so he can hold that form safely and stay himself inside it, which is a very Chopper solution, solving a terrifying loss of self problem with careful medicine and stubborn effort. It's not awakening, but the shape of the problem, a body pushed past what its mind is ready for, and a person fighting to stay in the driver's seat, is the same shape we've been looking at all night. He just got there with a syringe instead of a decade of mastery, which is either cheating or genius, depending on how charitable you're feeling. And that leaves the biggest loose thread of all, the one I planted right at the start and promised we'd come back to. The Logia. Every single awakening we've talked about tonight has been a Zoan or a Parametia. Not one confirmed, named, fully shown Logia awakening exists in the whole series. Smoke, fire, lightning, ice, all these element users, and we have never properly seen what happens when one of them reaches that higher ceiling. There are little moments people point at, a strange sequence back on Punk Hazard being the usual candidate, but nothing clean, nothing labelled, nothing Oda has stood up and confirmed. And the theories people build to fill the gap are all over the place, which is part of the fun. Some reckon an awakened Logia would let the user turn the surroundings into their element, the same way an awakened Paramecia turns them into string or mochi. So a fire user might make a whole field into flame, or a smoke user might turn the very air smokier. Others think it'd be something stranger, given how odd Logia powers already are. But it's all guesswork. We're genuinely in the dark, which for a power type, literally, about elements feels almost like a joke the story is playing on purpose. Of everything we've talked about tonight, this is the one true blank, and I find there's something restful about a mystery that even the most obsessive fans can't solve, because it means there's nothing for either of us to work out right now. We can just leave it sitting there, unanswered and peaceful, and let it be. It is genuinely one of the last blank spaces on the map of this particular idea, and it's not the only one, because for every fruit we've watched wake up tonight, there's another one we're all still quietly waiting on. This is the part where I get to be honest about the shape of the whole subject, which is that we've almost certainly only seen the opening chapters of it. Awakening got introduced fairly late in the series, and the pace of new examples has been picking up as the story heads toward its ending. So there's this whole shelf of characters who feel like they must have it, or must be about to get it, and the fun of it is sitting in that anticipation without any of the answers yet. The obvious name is Blackbeard, Marshall D. Teach, the one man in the whole series who's managed to carry 2 devil fruits at once, which is supposed to be impossible. He's got the dark fruit, a logia that lets him control darkness, pulling things in with a gravity all its own, and, unusually for a logia, cancelling out other people's devil fruit powers on contact. And he's got the quake fruit, the paramecia, that lets him generate earthquakes, the single most destructive power the series ever showed us, taken off a dead legend. Now think about what an awakening would mean for a man like that. His darkness fruit is a logia, and we've just spent a whole segment establishing that nobody has ever clearly shown a logia awakening. So if anyone's going to finally crack that door open, there's a decent argument it might be him. And given how much of an endgame villain he is, that would be an enormous moment. We haven't seen it, but it hangs there, this obvious empty slot with his name, half written on it. And Blackbeard is such a wild card because nobody actually understands how he holds 2 fruits in the first place. It's meant to be impossible. 1 fruit per body, take a second, and you die. He didn't. Nobody in the story can explain it, and neither can we, which means any rules we think we've worked out about awakening might simply not apply to him the way they apply to everyone else. He's the one big exception to the fruit system. So if there's going to be a surprise about awakening lurking in the endgame, he's the likeliest place for it to come from, given that he's shaping up to be one of the last and most important obstacles in Luffy's whole journey. The idea that he might have an awakening none of us have ever seen on a logia no less is one of the more tantalizing unknowns the story is holding over us right now. I genuinely don't know what it'll look like. I just suspect we haven't seen the last of that man's tricks. Then there are the emperors and near emperors whose awakening status is just left ambiguous. Big Mom, before her defeat, ate the soul fruit, a genuinely eerie paramecia that lets her take pieces of people's lifespan and pour that stolen life into objects, giving fire and clouds and dolls their own faces and voices and loyalty. Her whole territory is half alive because of it, and she's an emperor, one of the 4 strongest pirates alive. So you'd assume awakening, but it was never confirmed on the page. The same open question we ran into with Kaido. It seems to be a bit of a pattern with that top tier actually. They're so strong that whether or not they formally awakened almost stops mattering, and Oda seems happy to leave it unstated. You can keep going. There's Boa Hancock and her petrifying love fruit. There's Crocodile back in the picture, with his sand logia that gave Luffy so much trouble early on, another logia that could theoretically show us that missing type of awakening someday. There's Aokiji and his ice, Kizaru and his light, all these logia veterans quietly walking around with a ceiling none of them has been shown to reach. Any one of them could be the one who finally answers the question. And I think the reason I find this shelf of maybes so pleasant rather than frustrating is that it tells you where the story is in its own life. Early on, awakening didn't exist for us as readers at all. Now it's turning up more and more, spreading from villains to rivals to the hero himself, and every powerful character we meet carries this quiet possibility that they've got a higher gear we haven't seen. It's the story slowly raising its own ceiling as it approaches the end, making sure the final stretch has somewhere left to go. For a series this long, that's a neat trick, keeping a sense of upward room even after decades. So when you watch these fights now, there's this lovely low hum of anticipation under everything. Any of these people could pop the smoke at any moment. The map isn't finished. There are more doors than the ones we've walked through tonight, and the story's clearly not done opening them. Which is a comforting sort of thought to drift on, honestly. There's always more coming. There's a flip side to all this anticipation that I think is worth sitting with too, because it draws a clear edge around what awakening even is. Not every devil fruit power can reach it. During the 1.0 arc, we learn about the smile fruits, these artificial, mass-produced imitation zoans that Kaido's crew hand out. They're cheap, they're unstable, most of them fail, and give the user nothing but a permanent laugh they can't control, and even the ones that work only grant a fraction of an animal's traits. And crucially, there's no path from a smile to an awakening. There's nothing there to grow into. A real devil fruit, remember, seems to carry a will, a fuller self waiting at the top of that ceiling for the user to catch up to. An artificial one is a hollow copy with no ceiling and no soul in it. The door simply isn't there to open. I find that a genuinely useful contrast because it tells you what awakening actually requires. It's not just power, it's a real fruit with whatever mysterious living thing is inside it, and a real person, spending a real lifetime bonded to it. You can manufacture a shortcut to a bit of animal strength. You cannot manufacture the years, or the relationship, or the will. So all those henchmen running around with fake fruit powers, no matter how many of them there are, will never once trail that ribbon of smoke. It's reserved for the genuine article. And there's something almost reassuring in that, in a world this obsessed with power, that the deepest tier of it still can't be bought or mass-produced. It has to be grown slowly, the hard way, by one person and one fruit over a very long time. Before we wind down properly though, I want to double back to that little visual detail we started the whole night on, because now that we've seen every example, it's actually got more to say than it did at the beginning. We opened on that ribbon of haze drifting off a character's shoulders, and I called it the tell, the quiet signal that says this person is awakened. And now that we've walked past every example the story's given us, I want to come back to it, because it turns out to be a richer little detail than it first seems. And it's the kind of thing I could happily talk about for far too long at this hour. The first thing worth noticing is that the story never once explains it out loud. No character ever stops to point at another and say, "Ah, I recognise that steam, you must be awakened." It's never in the dialogue, it's purely visual, purely something the reader learns to read by watching, by noticing the same detail turn up on Doflamingo and Katakuri and Law, and then clicking that it means something. That's a genuinely confident bit of storytelling. Trusting the audience to spot a recurring visual cue and work out its meaning on their own without ever spelling it out is a lot harder than just having someone announce it. And it's more satisfying because the understanding feels earned. You weren't told, you noticed. The second thing, and this is the bit I find really lovely, is that the smoke isn't all the same. Luffy's in Gear 5 is white, bright and cheerful, matching the whole sunny liberation energy of the Nika fruit. But over on Egghead and beyond, the Five Elders and that Dream Fruit Knight wear a dark version. Black smoke instead of white. Same basic sash, opposite colour, and the story doesn't explain that difference either, but you can feel it doing work. The joyful god of freedom trails white. The ancient demons who erase history trail black. Whether that's a hard rule about the nature of the fruit or just a mood the art is setting, I genuinely don't know, and I'd rather not pretend I do. But it's clearly not an accident. The smoke has become a little visual language of its own, and colour is part of the vocabulary. The third thing is the absence of it, which we ran into right at the start with the prison beasts. No smoke on them because theirs wasn't a complete, controlled awakening, it was a forced one that cost them their minds. So the smoke isn't just marking power, it's marking mastery. It's the badge of someone who awakened and stayed themselves, still driving, still in command, which means the presence or absence of that little haze quietly tells you the most important thing about an awakened character, not how strong they are, but whether they're still a person. That's an enormous amount of meaning to load onto a wisp of steam, and the story does it without a single line of explanation. I think that's why I keep coming back to this detail, and why it felt like the right thing to open and nearly close on. Awakening could so easily have been a loud, obvious, screaming sort of power system, all glowing auras and shouted technique names. And there's some of that, sure, but the core signal of it, the thing that actually tells you what you're looking at, is this understated ribbon of smoke that never draws attention to itself and never gets explained. It's the whole idea of awakening in miniature, enormous power, worn lightly by people so far past needing to prove anything that they let their strength show as a bit of drifting haze and nothing more. So next time you spot it, on whoever finally awakens next, you'll know exactly what it means. And you'll know it because you noticed, which is the best way to know anything. So that's the whole tour, more or less. Every awakening the story's shown us, from the poor lost beasts at the bottom of a prison, up through the string and the mochi and the magnets and the surgery, all the way to a rubber boy who turned out to be a god, and a room full of ancient demons pretending to be men. And if there's one thread I'd hand you to carry off into sleep, it's a fairly gentle one. Underneath all the spectacle, awakening is really just the story's way of saying that someone has finally caught up to who they were always capable of being. That's the whole idea Kaido gave us at the start, the body and the mind growing into the power at last. It's not something bolted on, it's something that was already there, waiting the entire time, and the person just needed the years and the depth and usually one very bad night to grow into it. There's something quietly hopeful in that, if you sit with it. The fuller version of you was there all along, you were just getting there. It lands differently for each of them, which is the part I never tire of. For Luffy, it was joy, the fruit and the boy wanting the exact same thing, freedom and amplifying each other. For the prison beasts, it was ruin, the power arriving before they were ready and taking the person away. Same door, completely different rooms. And I think that's a truer thing about growth than most stories bother with. Coming into your full strength isn't automatically a triumph. It depends entirely on whether you're ready to still be yourself on the other side of it. There's plenty we still don't know, and I've tried to be honest about that all the way through, rather than tidy it up. We've never properly seen a Logia awaken. We're not entirely sure about Kaido, or about what the Five Elders even are. There's a whole shelf of characters carrying powers that might have a higher gear we've never watched them reach. And rather than that feeling like loose ends, it feels to me like a story that's still breathing, still holding a few of its best cards, with room left to surprise us before the end. That's a nice thing to drift off on, I reckon. The sense that there's more coming, and no rush to get there. If you fancy it, I might do a companion to this one some evening, on Haki, the other great power running underneath all these fights, because the two of them together are really the full picture of how strength works in this world. But that's a night for another time. No homework tonight. For now, there's nothing left to figure out. No fight to win, no mystery to solve, no smoke to read. Just the quiet after a long walk through a world you already love, with all its monsters and gods and fallen nobles tucked back into their pages, where they'll keep until morning. You can let all of it go soft now. The names, the fruits, the whole tangled map of it. It'll all still be there tomorrow, exactly where we left it. Rest well. Take it easy on yourself. And if you're still awake, that's all right too. Just keep your eyes closed, let the world get quiet, and let yourself drift. There's no hurry at all. We got all the way to the end. And now, there's nothing to do but sleep.